She is the co-host of the Pivot podcast by Vox, the host of Sway by New York Times Opinion, as well as a contributing opinion writer since 2018. Please welcome back returning champion, Kara Swisher. Kara, good to see you.
Good to see you. You look good.
Thank you. Thank you for saying so.
Yeah, you lost weight? You look like you lost weight.
That's all the time we have. I think we covered everything that I needed to cover today. You know what? I'm back in California, and it has a good impact on my general well-being. How are you doing, Kara?
Good, really good. I was just in Miami for the weekend, and now I'm back. I'm back in DC. It's the same old here. Let me just say.
So I'm really glad you're here. The Cold War between Apple and Facebook has turned hotter than usual. And I wanted to talk to you about it. You've obviously spent time with both Zuckerberg and Tim Cook. You interviewed Tim Cook just a few weeks ago on Sway. It was a great conversation. At issue here is an update to the Apple operating system. Can you talk a little bit about what the change is and why Facebook is so upset?
Let me just make it simple. There's going to be a pop-up, like a lot of people are used to them. And it's going to say, do you want these people to be tracking you? And everyone can do their little pop-up the way they want, as long as they're within Apple's standards. Facebook has one that says, we're helping you do better ads, and Instagram is free, and we're helping small businesses if you don't disallow us, essentially. And so it's changing the idea from opt-out, which is what everything is now. You have to find somewhere deep in the bowels of your system. And this makes it opt-in. And so you have to make the people aware of that you're tracking them. And Apple is requiring that in this essentially. They're basically being a cop here of the internet.
There's also a disconnect between how the companies see each other.
Yeah.
Zuckerberg on an earnings call recently said, we increasingly see Apple as one of our biggest competitors. But then Tim Cook says to you, I'm not focused on Facebook. I think Facebook, and he says, I'm not, he said, if I'm asked who our biggest competitors are, they would not be listed. It's sort of sad for Mark. It's like a Harvard and Tufts.
He's correct. He's not in the social media business. He's not in the advertising business. He's not in any of the businesses Mark is in. So I would see why he would do that, unless Mark got into media or making a phone. Perhaps right now they have had a failure with their phone, so they're not in the phone business. And so I would agree. I have to say with Tim on that one, I'm not sure what Mark is talking about. He could be their most, Mark should probably say their most annoying partner, essentially.
What's interesting is he's like, oh, I'm not focused on Facebook. Facebook, we're not thinking about them. And then when they announce the change, right, when they show you, when Apple puts forward, here's how it would work in an app, right? What's the app they use to demonstrate that you can opt out? It's Facebook. Yeah. Facebook is the example that they're using to show everybody.
Yeah. Well, it's the biggest. It's one of the biggest apps on the thing. Would be one of the top 5, I would imagine. What's interesting is Tim always takes a chance to scare Zuckerberg. He did an interview with me many years ago, in I think 2018, when I asked during the sort of Cambridge Analytica, the data leaks and everything going on with the Russians. I said, what would you do if you were in this situation? And he said, I wouldn't be in this situation. Like.
And he got a big laugh.
Yeah.
He got a big laugh when he said that. He's basically, that was around, Facebook's privacy problems. And he basically said, I don't need to deal with the hypothetical because I would never allow my company to behave the way his company is behaving, which I think gets at something here, which is this is like a longer term. This is not just business. In some ways, this is personal, that there's a real personal antipathy between these two companies. Or at least in this sense, Apple seems to have both business interest and a genuine moral concern about how Facebook does business. And it seems like Facebook finds Apple annoying.
What essentially Tim Cook was saying, and I think they showed this at a meeting they had in 2019, I guess, where Tim just said, get out of the business you're in. Your business is dirty. I think that really was what he essentially said. And so, Mark takes offense at that, obviously. A lot of people think their business is dirty. And so, and it goes back a long way. Steve Jobs talked about this too. And it's also a brand attribute for Apple. Privacy is a brand attribute that they use in their business. And so, it's a little bit hypocritical because they let Google Maps on there, and Google Maps gets lots of information. I just think they feel that Facebook is hugely egregious in the amount of information it sucks from users. And so using the iPhone to facilitate it, I guess they just were like, why should we? This is a better, and if we're protecting users, it's better for us as a business to do so. And then they can throw in the what a scummy group of people thing. And then for Mark, he's like making the argument that, well, not everybody can afford an iPhone and it's really expensive. And how dare he say we can't have these businesses that are paid for by advertising, and we're helping small businesses. What he leaves out of his equation is that no small business has a choice except to advertise on Google and Facebook because they have a duopoly that has crushed everybody else. So they're all a little hypocritical.
Well, right. So I want to get to that too, because there is this sort of like, at root here, Apple's like, we're going to use the power of our rent-seeking business to undermine your rent-seeking business while still working with Google's rent-seeking business. And by the way, all three of us have gotten far larger in the past few years, especially during the pandemic. Oh, by the way, our monopolistic position has grown stronger. All three of us separately, independently, have grown stronger during this pandemic. So, of course, Facebook, as always, seems to like lead with their most inauthentic and kind of like sleazy argument, right? They always do this. It's actually like an incredible kind of company culture thing. So they're like, how could you do this to small businesses, right? Which is, I think, like the most ridiculous argument they put forward. But there was a couple others that I actually thought struck me as being more fair, was what you just mentioned, right? Like, oh, you have a problem with us, but you have this business relationship with Google. But the other one, which is the more I was thinking about your conversation with Tim Cook and the kind of, there does seem to be a genuine concern about privacy, the more frustrated I was by the fact that, like, okay, you have now said that as a company, you have a value, which is privacy is a fundamental human right. Your phones are assembled in China. You are desperately trying to build out your business in China. How does Tim Cook reconcile with that, right? Because if I'm Mark Zuckerberg, I'm like, oh, okay, so privacy is great when you're trying to fuck my business. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to your business, privacy is I would say a second order right compared to bottom lines.
Lots of American companies do business in China. So, you know what I mean? They manufacture in China. And I think nobody really has a good answer for doing any manufacturing in China, but mostly everything in that room of yours comes from China. So I agree with you. I think they have tried to deal with the human rights issues that they had many years ago in these factories. Obviously, the system is in China to build these phones, and that's just, and all of them, not just their phones, but everybody else's and everything others products. And so it is a difficult issue because it is a big client. Now, Facebook is not in China, but Mark wanted to be in China. So the minute, if he could get in the proper way, I think they would. I don't think they did sort of the grand flounce out that Google did and then regretted a little bit. So it's incredibly, the issues around China are separate and problematic. But I do think it is this idea of whether a company should be, I think getting down to it ultimately is, should Facebook be allowed to take your information and do anything it wants with it without you knowing about it? And you should give consent. If you want to move everything away, because what they try to do is they drag in everything else. But I think at the heart of it is, if you want to use their app, you should know how they're using your information. I think it's as simple as that. You know what I mean? And we could accuse each of, like, the App Store issues with Apple. Facebook has a myriad of issues, right? Around Donald Trump, around everything else, around et cetera, et cetera. It just goes on and on with Facebook, with hate speech, with white supremacists, with QAnon, with anti-vaxxers. I mean, they're dragging a train of crap behind them, which is becoming rather large. So, but the issue is, you're a consumer, you need to know what Facebook's doing, and you need to opt into it, not have to opt out of it. And I think that's really, in that case, Apple's correct.
Yeah, no, I take your point, and I agree, right? You know, Facebook wants to make this about everything, and ultimately, Apple as a company is making a decision to put some more privacy protections. I think that's a great thing. But I think when the issue of China comes up, when some of the monopolistic practices of Apple come up, put this specific issue aside, right? Because Apple's right on this topic, right? Give people the choice. Aren't you uncomfortable with where we're at now, which is we have some of the largest companies on earth litigating matters of privacy, matters of public policy, matters of the safety of online communities, the reach of misinformation, all of this now kind of, because of an absence of regulation, being determined based on the whims of individual corporate leaders.
Aren't I uncomfortable? I've been screaming about it for years. I've been saying these companies are too powerful. So I'm like John the friggin' Baptist here on this issue. Yes, I'm uncomfortable. And I'm very, before the pandemic, I go, just you wait, they'll be richer than ever. And in fact, President Biden discussed it last night he was talking only about tech people. Those are the people who made all the money during the pandemic for the most part. It wasn't the cruise people, the airline people. It was the tech people. And if you look at the amount of money that all of them have put into their bank account and in the value of their company, it's unheard of. I mean, unheard of, the size that they've grown to and the power they've amassed during the pandemic, and accelerated all these trends, hurting retail, hurting everybody. Like, it's not just Apple, it's Amazon, it's Apple, it's companies like Zoom, it's Uber, it's Airbnb, it's absolutely Facebook, it's absolutely Google and everyone else. And so I think I've been screaming about this for a long time, is too much power is coalescing among too few companies. And our regulators at this point, why shouldn't they do what they're doing? Because our regulators have not gotten behind any kind of significant bipartisan legislation to deal with this. And not just legislation, but there's been some antitrust moves in the Justice Department. In fact, the Trump Justice Department, and that's continuing. There's been some state and local moves around antitrust. There's been Senator Klobuchar has done a lot in terms of proposing. They just have to pass these bills. And then the last thing is they have issues around taxing, around all kinds of things. And so we're waiting for something to happen, whether it's the FTC or of legislation or fines. One thing the Biden administration has done is added in two people, significant people, Tim Wu and Lena Khan. Lena at the FTC and Tim at the White House. Very anti-tech people. I don't call it anti-tech, suspect of tech, I would say, very outspoken in that regard. So that's really interesting to me. So they mean business by putting in these kind of people going forward, I think.
It was interesting listening to your conversation with Tim Cook, and you talked about this on Pivot as well, about like some of this is what happens when companies that don't make physical objects suddenly realize that creates a lack of power, right? Like Apple's power is like they make these things. And at the end of the day, you can have an algorithm, you can be one of the biggest companies on the earth, but for your ones and zeros to reach people's eyeballs, they need to be translated through a physical object. And I was thinking about that because you also spoke to somebody from DoorDash about their efforts to kind of build scale and be a similar kind of interface, right? Like kind of basically be that last step for people. That is a situation where you have a company trying to create the kind of rent-seeking industry that already that Apple has done in their App Store, that Google has done on Facebook, has done on ads. What do you think is happening inside of that fight between, you have DoorDash, you have Uber Eats, you have a few others?
You have a lot. And not just that. Amazon's in it in a way. Instacart is in it. Like they're all sort of in each other's space. It's a very competitive space. That said, in the very basic food delivery, restaurant delivery area, DoorDash, I think, is 50-some%. Uber is pretty high. And then Grubhub, I think, is somewhere in there. Or whatever. There's another one. Anyway, they're all competing in that space. That said, they have it over on all these restaurants who can't get together by themselves and pay the money that it would take to do this properly or to market or get people to use it. And again, the pandemic has been the biggest experiment, not just in American history world history around vaccines, but the biggest experiment in delivery. Now, it used to be just New York and Los Angeles and some cities. Now, like he was talking about, rural Kentucky is now using delivery. Well, now they're not going to go backwards. People don't go backwards once they find a practice. Same thing with Amazon. Everyone now gets their food delivered. They don't go and get it. So that gives the power to the delivery service, who holds a lot of the cards. And so it's a really big issue. He was talking about doing more for their customers, to try, the restaurant customers at least, to try to make them not feel quite as under their thumb. But, they've been plagued by tipping issues, employment issues, emissions issues, like people delivering. That said, I have to get in a car to go to the store. So like, is it more efficient? And so I think it's a really interesting area where certain people are grabbing landscape here in a new way that consumers interact with getting physical products. And then the same thing with digital products, depending on what that might be.
They're changing their policies to lower the fees for certain aspects of the services they provide. But then when you really say, wait, hold on a second. You were keeping the tips. You were charging 30% to businesses. You were charging some exorbitant amount for people just walk in, basically who order on the app and then walk in and pick it up. And you never even pay anybody for that. You're just connecting. You're just a credit card service at that point. Before I let you go, there's one last question I did want to ask you about, which is Elon Musk is hosting Saturday Night Live. And I'm curious what you think about it. Elon, I know you're excited about the show. You're a huge fan of Elon's comedy.
Yeah. Okay.
But like, I do think like part of this is like, I don't know. Like some people were upset about it. I don't really understand even being upset about it. He's just going to get up there and he's going to read off the cue cards and kind of fuck it up. That's sort of my expectation for Elon on SNL.
I think he's accidentally funny. That's what I think. I don't think he's funny in the intentional way. I think he just is like, what a funny character he is. It's an interesting issue is that he's become so famous in a pop culture way. It's a little bit like Trump. You know what I mean? Anything he says, his groups follow. He says Doge and everyone buys. He has real power. Now, interestingly, he was talking about Bitcoin. And when you look at the recent earnings by Tesla, part of their doing very well this quarter is because their Bitcoin investments went up. So, but then he goes Bitcoin. So is he manipulating? Like, it's a really interesting situation that he's gotten himself into is whatever he says, they do. He's got this fan base that's crazy. And so it's not unusual, I think, that Saturday would have him. And it'll be interesting to see what he says and does on that show, because he could turn and say, everybody buy Dogecoin, and then everybody will. And then is he manipulating it? Is he doing what? Or is he just having fun? And so, there's very few people. I'm trying to think of who you could compare him to. P.T. Barnum, who is a much better business person than people go history. Is he Howard Hughes? Who is he exactly?
When I think about Elon Musk right now, what I think about is it's hard to find public figures for whom the delta between their core work and their public persona have gotten so far apart.
Yeah. Well, he's doing very well in his work, actually.
Well, that's my point. That it is a testament to how silly and dumb his online persona is. That it has convinced a lot of people that creating Tesla was easy. And like.
No, it's not a persona. I'm telling you, it's not. He's like that away from everything. He's been like that for decades. I've known him for decades. He was always like this.
And when I say persona, yeah, I mean, I do mean his online persona. But how do you explain the difference then between someone who's able to do what he has done for electric cars, which is significant, and yet conducts himself like such a fucking moron in every other respect? Was making Tesla easy?
I don't think Edison was a walk in the park. I think it's just, I'm sorry.
He was an asshole, but he was smart.
No, I don't know. You look back at he did some crazy stuff. He did some stunts and he was a stunt man. Yeah, talk about someone who pulled all kinds of hijinks off. Like you have a vision of our inventors as not being weird and unusual, and they are. You know what I mean? Like Ben Franklin was kooky. Like whether, you know what I mean? Like he just was. And I know in history he looks more burnished, but you can feel it coming through. And lots of inventors are. I think what's really significant here is, look, he's hitting on all cylinders at SpaceX. They just won a big contract to basically make a moon base or make a moon lander, which Jeff Bezos wanted and is now suing over. They won a big defense contract, beating out Lockheed. They're doing incredible work on these rockets, like bringing down the cost and doing all kinds of really innovative things. Tesla has, let me just tell you, I think it's 2% of the cars on the road are electric or autonomous, that kind of thing. 80% of those are Teslas. Okay. So now the government is about to do this big infrastructure package. I just interviewed Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, former Mayor Pete. And a lot of it is around electric vehicles. Well, guess who's going to benefit from that? And guess who, by the way, was in the pioneering forefront of this? And he dragged GM and the rest of the world into this space, 100%. He's going to benefit from it. And now the government's going to pay for charging stations everywhere. It's going to pay for all kinds of things. He's going to do great for this. What's really interesting is people forget the Obama administration gave Tesla a loan of $500 million when it was on the ropes. And now he's the richest man in the world and building really amazing things. So why didn't we get a piece of that? That's an interesting question. Like I would ask myself that, but I mean, I've talked to lots of economists like Mariana Mazzucato about this. So he contains multitudes, John, just like you, for example. you know?
Yeah, but right. Kookie's one thing. Kookie's one thing. But it's quite another to be sophisticated enough to do what he's done in business and then go on Twitter and deny the pandemic, deny the efficacy of vaccines, right? This isn't kooky. This isn't Benjamin Franklin having a sex party in Paris. This is somebody spreading misinformation and seeming to like completely misunderstand the science of the disease.
I don't know what Edison would have been like with Twitter. I just don't know.
Thank God we'll never know.
I think sometimes he's playing, sometimes he's joshing. The COVID stuff, he and I had a very bad back and forth about that. I thought it was really irresponsible. At the same time, you can't deny some of these things. It's a very difficult, the stuff he did in Thailand, which he got off for really in court, around calling that guy a pedophile. His 420 stuff when he was weeping to the New York Times, he's a complex figure. I just don't know what else to say. I don't think he can still be a brilliant technologist and an inspirational figure. And also, P.T. Barnum comes to mind quite a bit when I think about him.
Yeah, I think of Kanye.
Kanye's brilliant too. I mean, it's just hard to grok because we're seeing him all the time versus any of these other business figures. There's a lot of kooky business figures running around this world. Howard Hughes was a big innovator before he lost his mind, really. But he kind of had lost his mind during that time period. And then he did also. Aviation would not be the same without Howard Hughes' contributions, even though we think of him as the guy with the tissues and the long fingernails and hair. But important figure in aviation.
We'll see how Elon transitions from his misinformation and SNL phase to his urine and bottles phase. But hopefully that doesn't happen for a while.
He's a complex figure and problematic, I would say, but also very impactful. He's had more impact on more areas. I think he's going to do the same thing in solar, with space, with cars. And meanwhile, everyone in Silicon Valley is like making dating services. He's doing significant things, and he's a little bit wacky. Is a lot wacky, actually. They're making dating service. Mark Zuckerberg is sort of doing hate speech all over Facebook, but he's a really nice young man. Like, I don't know what to say. It's complex.
It is. Kara Swisher, always so good to see you.